So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions and then we will open it up to the room. As we say, none of these questions have been vetted beforehand. We were talking just now about energy. Do you think the Lib Dems have got a good deal on energy at the moment?
I think the country's got a good deal. What we've announced today, we'll keep the lights on, which is pretty handy, because if we don't invest in more energy generation, we can't keep the lights on. So that's one very important thing. It'll create tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs. I mean, the estimate is by taking the decisions which we've announced today, we'll be protecting or creating around 250,000 jobs in the years ahead, which is incredibly important for particularly young people who want to obviously find work in these difficult times. And we're doing it in a way which will help the country wean itself off our kind of over-reliance on gas and oil and so on from unstable parts of the world, or even from very distant parts of the world, and get us off this roller coaster of prices which go up and down for reasons which are entirely out of our control. And the net result of that will be, the overall effect of that will be actually that our bills will be quite a bit lower than they otherwise would be the case. So the best estimates are that the net reduction in the average bill will be about £94 by the end of the decade.
But the figures being bandied around now saying an increase of £200 a year on the average bill.
No, I think you've got to sort of mustn't mix of apples and pears. I think from a householder's point of view, what's important is how much energy you need to heat your house. So what we do in the next coming years to insulate our homes, to make sure that the heat we produce doesn't just fly out of the window or through the roof, is immensely important. And that's what we're doing at the same time. So, as of in the coming months, you'll see that we're doing something called the Green Deal, where you'll be able to insulate your home and make sure that you're using less energy with no upfront cost, for instance. If you put all those measures together, this does save people money. But crucially, what it does is it means that it is a big decision for the long term. It means that we're investing in the clean, green sources of energy that are not only good for the environment, but they're good for jobs. There's a real race going on. If you look at what's happening in China, if you look at what's happening in Brazil, everybody's racing now to invest in these new green technologies because they know that's what's essential for their modern economies and what help create jobs. And so I think the real focus, beyond and above everything else, is what a very important announcement this is for hundreds of thousands of jobs.
But you're saying investing, surely it's us, the bill payers, who are investing, and the energy companies are still making billions in profit.
Well, you're quite right that in order to make sure that you can put the billions of pounds into new green and renewable energy generation so that we're not over-reliant on the kind of fossil fuels from the other side of the planet where the prices go wildly up and down, we're saying that the consumer makes, us householders, bill payers, make a contribution to that. But the comparison you've got to make is if you don't do that, are we any better off as bill payers by just relying on gas from the other side of the planet? And most people would agree that you're not better off, because then the prices go up, wildly up and down and you've got absolutely no control over it whatsoever.
Okay. Before I open it up, I just wanted to ask one question I could possibly have phrased better. Where do you stand on Nadine Dorries?
Where do I stand? Well, I'm a little bit I'm very nonplussed. I mean, she was elected to do a job for her constituents. And her constituents, like my constituents, like the constituents of like you've all got a rightful expectation that your MPs work hard, day in, day out, week in, week out, for the constituency you're representing. And sort of disappearing to the other side of the world to eat insects in a jungle doesn't seem to me to really have much of a direct bearing on the needs of her constituents.
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Paxton, and I am one of those constituents in mid-Bedfordshire. You and the other party leaders talked about the possibility of recall for any corrupt or inappropriately acting MPs.
Yes.
Where's that legislation stand at the moment, and what will the process be when it does actually, if it ever does actually become legislation? Yeah,
good point. For those who don't know, so all the parties said in the wake of the MPs' expenses scandals that you need to be given the right to basically sack people like us if we commit serious wrongdoing, right? And the kind of mechanism that we're looking at is that of course, an MP has to be shown to have committed serious wrongdoing, because I think it would be a bit it'd be a bit of a kangaroo court if just because you don't happen to like somebody, you can sort of sack them. It's not that. So you've got to show that there's going to be some mechanism by which you can prove that serious wrongdoing has been done. And then, if 10% of the voters in a constituency sign a petition and say, because of that wrongdoing, we want to choose, we want to have the opportunity to choose another MP, then you have a by-election. So that's the idea. I mean, I'll be really upfront with you. What we're finding quite difficult to agree on is how you define serious wrongdoing. It sounds kind of really simple, but it's really, really tricky to define it in law. And if you set the bar too high, then you are quite rightly going to say, oh, well, this is a nonsense. It's not really, no one's ever going to do something bad enough to trigger this recall. If we set it too low, you'll just have by-elections everywhere all the time, and it'll be, everyone will be constantly sort of trumping up charges against each other, if you see what I mean. So we're trying to get that balance right, and we're still working on it, but I'm very keen that we should do this because I do think it's wrong, and I'm not saying, I'm not applying it to any specific case, but I do think where something goes very, very wrong, there's real serious wrongdoing, which isn't caught, where you're not caught by the criminal law. Obviously, you go to prison. But
an MP can actually go to prison for up to 12 months and still be an elected MP, can't they?
Absolutely, you're quite right. So you're clearly very familiar with the rules. I wasn't going to go into all the details, but there is a little glitch where at the moment the rules, you're quite right, means that you are automatically disqualified as an MP if you go to prison for more than 12 months, but not if you go for prison less than 12. Now that's ridiculous. I basically think if you go to prison, this recall thing should. So we'll definitely change that. So that's for sure. It's the wider bit. It's the bit where you're not necessarily being charged for something, or you're not being imprisoned. How do you make sure that you set that set that definition of serious wrongdoing in a proper way? I mean, we had the case of Dennis McShane recently. Where the committee that looked into what he did with his expenses said it was the most serious case they'd ever seen. Now he stood down. But if he hadn't stood down, would that have been trapped by, would that have been caught by the trigger of serious wrongdoing or not? I suspect most people think it should be, but that's the kind of stuff we're trying to work out.
Hertfordshire County Council has a proposal to build a huge waste incinerator, 380,000 tonnes, just down the road from here in Hatfield, will affect the people of Hatfield and the people of St Albans, especially those in Coney Heath. And it is right next to a school for children with special needs, homes, and Hatfield House, a rather well-known stately home. Anyway, if this is the greenest government ever, what I want to know is, will this government put a stop to incineration because they don't reduce carbon in the way that the alternatives would reduce carbon? Because the alternatives to incineration, of course, are to increase recycling to the ultimate and to reduce waste at source, and there is then no need for incineration. And in particular, will the government stop incinerators, huge, massive, centralised ones like this, which would cause a massive impact on one area, and as I've said, particularly on school children, on residents, and on the environment? It's not green at all. It's the very least green way of producing energy.
Well, I certainly agree with you, as do many other people, obviously. I certainly agree with you that the more we can recycle, the more we can be efficient about how we use our, dispose of our own waste, use things in our own home. Of course, the less need you have for incineration. I don't think I can brandish a magic wand and say we can sort of decree that there's no more incineration at all. I don't think we're quite there yet. I'm not sure if you'd want me or any national politician to sort of point a big long finger from Whitehall and say we're going to trump local decisions about whether this goes ahead or not. If my understanding is that in the county council, I think the Conservative councillors have supported it.
It's been called in by the DCLG. They're holding it at the moment.
It has been called in. It has been called in.
No, not called in. It's been holding. I better be precise. It's on a holding.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll leave that to DCLG. But I mean, obviously there's local disagreement. I think my party's voted against it. Where it could. The Conservative county councillors have supported it. You're quite right. There is a mechanism where these things can be looked at by DCLG, but the nature, as you know, of these planning decisions is first that the local voices are very important. The way in which councillors vote is very, very important. And secondly, there's quite a precise kind of legal sort of process, which I can't simply just sort of tear up and say, you know, it's going to be stopped or I'm against it. That's why the DCLG has to go through the various steps. But at the end of the day, you need to make your case, which you are indeed this morning. You need to make your case locally, and you know, that's partly what local democracy is about. Otherwise, what's the point of having county councils, district councils and others? And you need to make your voice, you know, heard with those politicians who either agree or disagree with you.
I was going to talk to you about garden cities because I'm chair of the Lib Dems in Welwyn Hatfield, but actually I'm going to follow up on Cathy's question on the incinerator because I think it raises a question about local democracy.
Yeah.
One of the frustrations for some of us, particularly in the Lib Dems, the way the coalition has worked, is the fact that we didn't win on AV and we haven't got anywhere further on PR. It was a shame, I think, that we didn't go for PR at local government level. One of the big problems we've got in Hertfordshire is something like 48% of the people vote Tory and they get 55 out of 77 of the seats at county council. It's scandalous. And that's why we're not getting our voice heard on issues like the incinerator. Can we move that agenda forward, do you think?
Well, I, like you, obviously, I'm a supporter of a more democratic electoral system at whatever level. But you're right, it hasn't been a hugely successful undertaking. It's been difficult enough, in fact it's been impossible to persuade people we should even have a smidgen of democracy in the House of Lords, yet alone a more democratic system of election to the House of Commons. But look, I personally, certainly speaking as the leader of our party, I will always make sure that where we can, maybe after the next general election, we can introduce a fairer voting system at local level as well as at national level. Of course it makes sense. I mean, I don't want to sort of rehearse or rehash all the arguments about our electoral system, but it just cannot be right that you can have people who can take decisions on your behalf who don't have anywhere near the majority of local support on their side. It just, clearly lots of people disagree with me on that, otherwise we would have won the referendum, but I, for the life of me, cannot understand why people get so hot under the collar about a simple suggestion of making our democracy a little bit more democratic. It's a very simple principle. People in my position and other positions of influence and power who are elected by you should do it in line with your preferences. And you can't really do that if you've got a system which constantly gives people whopping great big majorities to do what they like, even though they haven't even bothered to get the majority of people on their side. And that's what, that's what I think we should continue, obviously, to strive to change. Golly, like a blizzard of... start with the lady there. And do you want to just wait for the microphone?
Hi, my name's Philippa. I'm a resident here in St Albans. I just wanted to hear your views on the family allowance cuts that are coming in and how you can justify a family earning $50,000 starting to lose their family allowance.
You mean the child benefit?
The child benefit, yeah. But a family next door earning £30,000 more won't lose anything at all. So personally for me, I'm going to lose the equivalent of nearly a £5,000 a year salary cut in these difficult times. But I've got a next door neighbour who, as a family in a household, will earn £25,000 a year more than us.
Because they're both earning.
Because they're both earning, but they're both under the limit. How can you justify the unfairness in that?
I admit it's very, very... I mean, firstly, on the overall decision of asking people in the sort of top 10, 15% of earners in this country to make a sacrifice, which it is. It's a, and we've never hidden it. It is a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice I expect you to welcome, because who does it? Who does welcome any sacrifice in these tough times? But we just think it is right to make sure that the burden of tightening our belts, which we're having to as a country in a very, very big way, is spread as evenly as possible. And it's worth remembering, by the way, before I just come to your example of the difference between different households. The average income in this country is what, £24,000. I totally accept that you don't feel as rich as Croesus. I totally get that. But I mean, from the government's point of view, we have to try and make sure that these billions and billions of pounds we have to save is spread as evenly as possible. And there are people on very low incomes who are having their benefits frozen, or having their tax credits frozen, or even reduced. We're trying to do this as evenly and as balanced a way as possible. It is controversial, we're trying to do that. On child benefit, as you know what we've done, we changed the original plan so that you didn't have this sort of cut-off point, so that it's kind of tapered downwards if you earn between 50,000 and 60,000. There is, in practical terms, no way that you can necessarily capture that where you have two earners earning below either 50,000 or 60,000, which is clearly the case for your neighbours. To be honest, having looked at this very carefully, any time you administer anything in the benefit system, whether it's child benefit, whether it's tax credit or whatever, you always get you always get some anomalies because at some point you have to draw the line somewhere. We've tried to do it as reasonably as possible, as I say, phasing it out between 50,000 and 60,000, which should help a lot of families and couples who otherwise would have been more severely affected. But yeah, I accept it's not something that you're going to welcome.
No, and I'm happy to sacrifice for people that earn less.
It's just you feel, yeah.
But I think it's a very, very unfair system when you're talking about differences of 20, 30,000 and people at the top end of the scale are still going to be getting their benefit and people down the lower end, just in that middle, are going to be worse off in a very unfair system. It's because your neighbours will be then earning, both of them will be then earning below 50,000, right? Yeah.
So they might be just both earning 40,000 or something.
Well, if they're both earning 49,000, that's a big increase.
Yeah.
That's
No, I accept it's a dilemma. I'm not trying to hide away from it because we saw that was that felt particularly unfair. The solution we gave to it, which is not a perfect one, but does deal with a lot of cases of where people would feel rightly very shortchanged compared to others, was by phasing it out. Originally, as you may remember, we had a sort of cut-off point. I forget where we said originally. It's sort of 50,000, and then we've extended that between 50 and 60. And look, on December the 5th, we're going to have to publish something called the Autumn Statement. It's like misnomer in the middle of winter, but there you go, which will set out new savings that we have to make, and indeed tax rises we're going to have to introduce in order to keep tightening our belts into the future, which we're having to, like many other countries in a similar position as us. And we're constantly, every day, trying to work out what's the best balance between savings from welfare, tax increases on the more wealthy, cuts in departmental spending, and it's a pretty it's not the easiest kind of balance to get right. But what we strive to do, and it's the thing that I think is very important for Liberal Democrats to do in government, is to try and do it as fairly as possible. Otherwise, you just end up having always the poorest in society who pay for the consequences of crises which they didn't create. I mean, why should it be the people with the most modest means who have to pay the consequences of the mess that the banks or indeed the previous Labour government left for us? That's not fair. So that's why we're spreading the burden in the way that we have. Yeah.
I asked my 15-year-old yesterday what he'd ask you, and he grunted. Now, given that
Would he say the same if you asked what he wants for supper?
Oh, no, never. No, he's got a very healthy appetite. Now, he's in the middle of his GCSE year. He's feeling completely overwhelmed with all his GCSEs and his football and playing football and everything else. I don't think if he was asked to vote as a 16-year-old that he would have a clue where to start. And my question to you is, do you really think 16-year-olds are in a position to actually make a positive contribution to voting?
Thankfully, he's not here then to hear his mum say that. But look, I do personally. I accept people like you don't. I mean, my children. I've got 3 sons, but they're much smaller. When they start grunting at the age of 15, 16, I might start agreeing with you. But at the moment, I have illusions that my 10 and 8 and 3-year-olds will blossom into politically aware and well-informed teenagers. You're laughing. I know. Well. No, but can I a more serious answer? Yeah, you're right. It's where you draw the line. But I know lots of people, frankly, who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, who also grunt when you ask them about politics. I mean, how can I put it? The grunt response is not the best measure to decide at what point you allow people to have the constitutional right to decide who runs their country for them. Now, there is a very, very high level, as we know, high level of cynicism about politics, antagonism towards mainstream politics. It's, I think, particularly acute now for all sorts of reasons. But I don't think we should take indifference, or indeed in some cases apathy towards politics, to be a reason not to try and expand the number of people who do have a say. And if you are 16, your son could, if he wanted to, enter into the armed forces. They have many other rights, but they don't have the right to decide who sends our troops into war in the first place. That seems to me to be unbalanced. That's what I personally am in favour. It's not something we're going to do, by the way, in this coalition government, because it's not something that we have agreed upon between our two parties in the coalition government, but it's something personally, yes, I do support.
Yeah, sorry, I possibly didn't phrase what I was quite saying. It was more the fact that as a 15-year-old, he is so inundated with everything else that's going on in his life that he can't actually give any time to something that he doesn't think is a priority right now. He's got... Yeah,
but again, I know lots and lots of people who are much older than your 15-year-old who also say they've got either no time or no inclination to take any interest in politics whatsoever. I can't...
Back to Nadine again.
So back to... I'm not going to talk about Nadine again. Look, I think we just disagree. I totally accept it's an issue which divides people. My own view is there are so many issues now which affect 16, 17, 18-year-olds in a really big way in this country. I know lots and lots of people of that age who I think are lively, who've got great ideas what we should do with the country, who are interested in the country, what's going around them, and I would like to give them the voice to vote. Are there any 16-year-olds in the audience? So just tell me, you're 16? Do you think you should be able to vote?
Yeah, I do. I'm running as a...
Do you want to just take the mic?
I'm currently running as a candidate for the next elections for the Hertfordshire Youth Parliament.
Oh, right.
And I've got a girl in my school who is currently at the House of Commons today as a debate lead, and I think she's 16 as well. And I think there's more than enough 16-year-olds who would like to vote and don't have the opportunity. However, it's the same through all ages. There's not that many people voting anymore in the election, and actually it's all about the political education that would enable 16-year-olds to vote, because at school I've never had political education, but I'm interested, but a lot of my peers wouldn't even think about doing it.
Any other 16-year-olds, or are you 16? Can I just... Sorry, I'm not doing this to prove a point, I'm just quite interested in what...
Well, I'd like to have the opportunity to vote because I'm quite interested in politics.
But you might not take it up. Yeah.
And things like that, but we don't actually have any politics lessons in school, so for quite a lot of my peers it would be quite difficult for them to make a decision, I think. So do you think
just out of interest, hands up in the audience generally who believes that 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds should be given the right to vote, and who thinks they shouldn't? Yeah, it's a slight majority here, but I don't quite know what the... Anyway, there you go, the debate continues. Right, who else? Gentleman there at the back. I'll
Thank you very much. Jeff Harrison, I'm a local councillor here. You're in my ward at the moment.
Thank you for letting me enter into your ward. Well, you make it sound as if I need visa requirements to come.
Well, we'll let you in this one.
Sorry, kind.
I took part in the Local Democracy Week a few weeks ago at one of the local schools, and I was most impressed with the quality of questions that they put to the panel of councillors. It made us scratch our grey matter quite strongly to give full answers. So, yes, the young people are very keen on local democracy, and I would welcome it fully altogether.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's not a question, that's a statement. No, it's fine.
Thank you. Marion Birch, I'm Chief Executive of Age UK Hertfordshire, so that gives you a clue of what my questions are going to be about. 18% of the population are now over retirement age. The fastest growing part of the population is the over 80s. By 2036, there'll be probably 50,000 people aged over 100. So, yeah, it's a little bit scary, but the question is then, well, I suppose there's two parts really. How is the country going to support social care into the future? Because inevitably, really, it's quite inevitable that older people will start to be suffering from sort of frailty, even if we do try to keep them fairly fit. So how is the country going to support that? And also, what about the Dilnot report on capping care costs to individuals?
Very good. Look, we could talk about this all day. I think the challenge of what they call the demographic challenge in the sort of jargon is probably one of the biggest things we and most developed societies have to deal with in the years ahead. And how do you make sure you do that in a way which is fair to the different generations? Fair, obviously, to those who deserve dignity and respect and being well looked after in old age, but not in a way which somehow means that youngsters don't feel that they're being asked to support that system more than they can bear. It's a very, very difficult balance to strike. Now, I would basically single out two things, if I may. Firstly, I think the way in which our social care system and the NHS have kind of tended to work as if they're sort of different galaxies, I think has been a terrible problem. Time and time again, I'm an MP from Sheffield. I will meet people who older people who've gone into hospital. Maybe they've had a fall and they've broken a bone or something or the rest of it. They come out of hospital, and the sort of the communication between those people who've been looking after them in hospital and those who look after them in the care system is just hopeless. And they don't work together. And I think actually if you made the NHS and the social care authorities work more effectively together, you'd keep a lot of people much healthier in their own homes. So one of the hidden advantages, would you believe it, of the much maligned NHS reforms which are going on is that there is a real opportunity now to do what they call in the jargon of integrated care, so that social care authorities and the NHS work together. It's just no good, I think, to be sitting at home as an elderly person, anxious that you don't know who the social care authorities are going to send to your house to look after you and to prepare your meal and to wash you and whatever that day, and you've got absolutely no control over that. And at the same time, your doctor and the NHS doesn't know what kind of care you're getting at home. All of that should be brought together. So that's one thing. On Dilnot, for those of you who don't know, so Andrew Dilnot, terribly clever chap, was asked by the government to design a system which would prevent people from having to... Is there any water, by the way? Prevent people from having to sell their homes to pay for their costs of social care. And to cut quite a complex story short, he's come up with a system, basically of insurance, really, which is, where we would all be asked to cover our care costs up to a certain limit, but basically we'd all be insured, if you like, for any costs beyond that certain limit. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks. Beyond that certain limit, so that people wouldn't have to sell their homes for care, which is a terrible thing for someone to have to do. I basically want us to do it. Problem is, it costs a lot of money. And without knowing where we're going to get that money from, it would be wrong of me to sort of say, we're going to do it by next Tuesday, when we haven't yet worked out where the money's coming from. But it's one of the things that we're talking about within the coalition at the moment, so that hopefully, we will be able to decide, early in the new year, next year, when we're going to do a version of what Andrew Dilnot has proposed, so that in the future, in the years ahead, you don't feel compelled to sell your home to pay for your social care costs. So I'm very keen that, and I'm convinced we need to do a version of Andrew Dilnot. We just need to cross the T's and dot the I's, and how we find the money over time. And if you find money for that, what does that mean you can't do elsewhere? And that's what we're working on right now.
Hi, my question is regarding disabled children who are going to mainstream schools. Many children across Britain have autism. They end up going to mainstream school even with a mental age of 6 months, even though they're 5, 6 or 7. And this goes on for years, and the school feel handicapped to do anything about it. They feel under pressure from the local authority. The child pulls the hair of the other kids, bites the other kids, bites the teachers, and nothing is done. I have personal experience of this with my own son.
Well, as you know, the whole area, you'll know better than I do from your own experience then, the whole issue of what they call in the sort of jargon SEN, special educational needs provision in this country is very fraught, it's very difficult. You have, as you know, specialised provision in some schools, and then some other schools provide mainstream provision very effectively by employing staff who can look after those children who have autism or other...
But they're not hiring the people. They're just leaving the child to rot in the school and ignoring it.
I think to be fair, I hope you'd acknowledge, to be fair, it really does depend quite a lot from school to school and area to area. I think it's probably unfair to make that generalisation. I know lots of good schools that have really invested in making sure that children with autism or other challenging or in other challenging circumstances are given the right support they need.
Only if they're taken to tribunal, and only 1% of those children who have these issues have parents who will take the situation to a tribunal.
Right. You're right, tribunal is one recourse, but
that's very expensive, and most parents don't,
yeah.
And they don't have time because they're too busy working.
Yeah, as I said before, I really do think it does if you're if you look at it sort of across the country, it does vary massively from area to area and indeed from school to school. I know in my own constituency there are some schools that are frankly better at providing specialised provision for children who need extra help than others. And I've got 2 schools in my constituency which are specialised for children with special educational needs. Can I just finish, and then I'm very keen to, obviously, but we are looking right now at whether we need to change the law to make provision of children with autism and other educational challenges, how we can improve that in the law. So, you know, it's something that Sarah Tether, who was a Liberal Democrat minister in the Department for Education, and now David Laws, who's succeeded her, are looking at very, very closely indeed. Because, so I'm not in any way trying to duck the challenge, and there is an inconsistency of provision, and there is a wide variety of provision from area to area, from local education authority to local education authority, from school to school, and we're actively looking at seeing whether we can improve that significantly through new legislation, possibly next year.
What would the government do to get the 18 to 24-year-olds to vote in the next general election, as they're the most apathetic group shown, and shown from the last general election?
Yeah, it's one of the great challenges, is how to make many young people who, as you say, either feel apathetic or indeed angry, as I know certainly, about decisions which this government's taken, or indeed other governments and politicians take. How do we say to young people, look, however angry you feel, however apathetic you feel, don't please give up on democracy. And there are just so many things that we've talked about them here. Creating jobs by investing in renewable energies for young people. Proper childcare so that the young people of the future have been properly catered for from a very young age. All young people grow old. They'll be as interested as anybody, you would have thought, in how they're going to be catered for later, and indeed what costs they will need to pay towards it. All of these things are immensely important, and you know, quite literally, a young person's future is our collective future. You know, you have the future of our country in your hands. So I really do hope that whatever the anger and the apathy, kind of whoever party you support or you don't support, we constantly make the case for, you know, joining it. Democracy ain't perfect. Politics certainly isn't perfect. Politicians aren't angels. There are plenty of things you can criticise all the time, and plenty of things you can get angry about. But unless someone's worked out a different system, democracy is what we've got. And if you don't join in, then don't be surprised if you end up with people you don't agree with. And I just think we have to make that case over and over again. But what do you think?
But the thing is, though, if I go around college and ask someone about like who Nick Clegg is or David Cameron is, some people will not even know who they are. Shouldn't you make politics more like compulsory?
That's quite a relief, actually, from my point of view sometimes. But yeah.
But shouldn't you make like government politics or subjects like this more compulsory in schools so people know about their government and they can't just say, like, they might not jump on the a bandwagon and say, yeah, I'll just vote for this guy because my friends vote for him as well.
I mean, I think, look, I mean, I'm in my mid-40s. When I did my then O-levels and A-levels, there was no really meaningful politics option. It's actually relatively recent that a lot of young people are taking up the politics option. So would you believe it? You might think it's rubbish, but it's a whole lot better, I tell you, education on politics and citizenship than it used to be. Then I think there was a big advance, which is that citizenship was included in the curriculum, which was a good thing in the broadest sense. But the problem was it was very, very patchily taught. There were some schools with inspiring teachers who really got young people excited about citizenship, and others where it was frankly just an awful tick box exercise. And what we're trying to do as a government is basically give teachers and head teachers much, much more discretion about what they do in the classroom, above and beyond the sort of core of things they have to teach. The risk is it means that, you know, in some schools where, you know, the schools weren't very enthusiastic about citizenship classes, they kind of wither a bit on the vine. But I hope actually, you know, for all the good reasons you described, it actually means that more and more schools will maintain an interest in politics and citizenship.
There's over 1 million young people unemployed currently in the UK. I was just wondering what the government or you had any ideas or upcoming policies to try and get more school leavers and university graduates employed and...
One of the biggest issues we face, actually about 300,000 of that much cited figure are actually in full-time education, right? So you've got to boil it down a bit. And then there's actually several thousand more who are between things. So when you boil it down, it's probably a hardcore of, still far, far too many, but it's a hardcore of hundreds of thousands rather than a million. That's the first thing to say. It's no sort of excuse, but it's just because of the way that the figures are calculated. A lot of youngsters who are actually in full-time education are counted towards that figure. I think there are many things we can do. Probably the biggest thing we're trying to do is something that I've proposed and something I sort of have designed. Is something called the youth contract. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have.
Good. Hooray, that's one step forward. And it's £1 billion of support for young people between the ages of 18 and 24. And basically, the youth contract offers you, if you are between the ages of 18 to 24 and you've been out of work for a certain while, basically a guarantee to either earn or learn through different routes. So we're subsidising thousands of extra apprenticeships for youngsters in that category, in addition to increasing the number of apprenticeships on a scale that no government's done for decades. We're funding about about 250,000 work experience places. And most most innovatively, we're offering employers here in Hertfordshire and elsewhere basically a subsidy worth half the basic wage for 6 months, or roughly the equivalent of the employer's national insurance contributions for over a year for a youngster on the basic wage. We're literally just offering that subsidy if the employer takes a young person rather than somebody else. It's early days. Parts of it are working well. The work experience stuff is working well. If I'm really honest with you, I'm a bit frustrated that more employers, for those of you who are employers here who might think of taking on a young person, get in touch with the Job Centre Plus, because you can use this subsidy. You literally get money, you get paid from the government to take on younger people. I'm still quite frustrated that lots of employers aren't taking up these opportunities. If we get that all right, that will help about 500,000 youngsters. Okay. Won't all give them a job, but it'll certainly help a lot of them on the way to either getting a job or finding one successfully.
Okay, but the government is, I know I didn't say this before, but the government is constantly raising the retirement age and the pension age. So why don't they just leave it as it is or decrease it? Because you've got a lot of older people who are still in employment. Why don't we just give them their pension so that their jobs can go to the younger people and they can...
I think you've united young and old in the audience now, as you tantalisingly offer early retirement with buckets of cash.
And jobs for younger people.
Oh, right, everything. Okay, right. Well, the first thing is slightly where we came to earlier. We've got an ageing population. And we literally do not have the money as a country to pay pensions in the old way at the previous age of retirement. But you'd have to pay for it. Someone would have to pay for it. And there's just this constant. And by the way, all countries, or most of them in North America and Europe, are raising the retirement age and changing the contributions that people make to their pensions, very, very controversially, to make it affordable, because you need pensions when you retire which are affordable. Otherwise, we're just borrowing on the never, from one generation to the next to pay for pensions that we can no longer afford. That's the first point. The second point is that, I mean, with the greatest respect, it is genuinely a misunderstanding, the idea that for every old person who takes a job, somehow you're taking a job from a youngster. I don't think it's a sort of zero-sum game. There isn't a sort of fixed number of jobs in an economy, and if an old person works, that means a young person's not working. The idea is bluntly to try and expand the pot generally. And would you believe it, even in these very tough times, we've created 1 million new jobs have been created in the private sector over the last couple of years. And thankfully, amidst all the other bad news, youth unemployment has now dipped below 1 million, these headline figures, and unemployment is much lower than many people feared. There are lots of people working part-time who'd like to work full-time, sure, but at least they're in part-time work rather than no work at all. So that's my approach, at least.
A poll published earlier this year in The Guardian found that support for the Liberal Democrats would jump from 14% up to 19% if Vince Cable was the leader of the Liberal Democrats instead of yourself. I was wondering why you perceive that to be the case.
Why do I perceive that to be the case?
Yes.
What a nice question. Look, how can I put this delicately? In politics, you never know what's going to happen until people actually are asked to vote, rather than what they say to pollsters. You never know what leadership means until you actually have to do it. Now, I've always, I've never ever sort of flinched or shirked from the fact that I've led my party, yes, it's controversial, into a coalition with our sort of erstwhile opponents, the Conservatives. By the way, highly controversial for people who loathe the Conservatives who used to vote for the Liberal Democrats, in exactly the same way that if Gordon Brown and I had formed a coalition, there are lots of people who loathe Labour who would have also been angry with us. Creating coalitions in a culture where people are used to sort of slam dunk results, where one team or the other always wins, it's always going to be controversial, right? So of course that hits and affects your popularity. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I so happen to be leading a party in government where there is literally no money left, where the latest projections are that our economy will be 11% smaller in 2016, literally just smaller than it wouldn't have been if Labour hadn't messed things up in the first place and allowed the banks to blow up on their watch, right? So no money, economy smaller, and dealing with what a lot of people say are, your enemies. Of course, that's controversial. Now, look, you have a choice in life, as in politics. You can either spend your whole time avoiding controversy, ducking and weaving, never taking responsibility, never sticking your chin out, or you can try, which I've tried to do for 2.5 years, and I will continue to do right up to the next general election, is say, look, did we get every decision right? No. Apologise when you get things wrong, be open about that, but explain to people over and over and over again that when there's no money and when no one has won the election, which is your decision, the voters' decision back in 2010, there aren't easy, pain-free choices which will make you smell of roses and wonderfully popular every day. There aren't. There aren't. You choose. At the end of the day, you can choose in 2050. What kind of politicians do you want? Do you want politicians who constantly kind of sort of say, oh no, I sort of freeze when they have to do something unpopular, or politicians who try and do things for the long-term benefit of the country? Now, the energy announcement's a classic one. Lots of people already criticising, piling in this morning. I genuinely believe what we've taken is not easy, because it's quite a complex thing to describe, but it's a massive boost for our country in the long term. And you as a sixth former, I hope, will be interested in the long term. And I hope over time you'll see that what we're doing is right for the long-term benefit of the country. And that is what I will continue to do. And then lady there.
Hi, I run a PR company locally with Sophie here. And we're looking for a new client. And I believe you probably need a little bit of help on the PR front at the moment. But no, on a more serious note, I just wanted to know, with all the challenges that you face at the moment, what gives you sleepless nights, the biggest challenge?
My 3-year-old.
Apart from your 3-year-old. Is there anything that in particular that you worry about, obviously, at night, on all the things that you do have to think about during the day?
Oh, is there anything particular? There's so much to worry about, you might as well just go to sleep. Look, I've always worked very, very hard. I work very hard. I'm also very, treasure my family more than anything else in life, and Miriam and I, we have a very we try and be very private about our children, and we never put our children in front of the camera, so I'm very, very hands-on dad, and Miriam works full-time, so I juggle all of that. So, when I get home, I'm bombarded with questions about why the Nintendo DS is not working, and me saying, why have you not done your reading, as much as any other parent. So that, that keeps me occupied as much as anything else. I just think, I think the thing that probably it's not worry is the wrong word, but the thing that I feel we just need to kind of understand as a community, as a country as a whole, is that what happened back in 2008, it wasn't any old recession. I mean, there was literally like a cardiac arrest in the heart of our economy. It just blew up. I mean, our banks, when we came into power, we discovered that the banks' liabilities of all the British banks were almost 5 times bigger than the whole of the British economy, right? So I sometimes think that we have perhaps not been, politicians have not been candid enough with quite how serious the situation is, and that there's a long way still to go before we're out of the woods, right? And that's just going to be painstaking work. It isn't going to make us all perfectly popular. It doesn't mean that we're going to be rewarded in the opinion polls. But we have a decision to make as a country. Do we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, put the pieces back together again in this broken banking system, try and fill the black hole in our public finances so that the youngsters of today aren't paying off our generation's debts, make sure that older people are properly catered for, do all of those things. If we duck that, because it's all too difficult and people get shouted at in the pages of The Guardian or whatever, fine, that's people's choices. It'll be a monumental betrayal, in my view, of the needs and the hopes and the aspirations of future generations in this country. And that's it's kind of, it's not a worry, it's just kind of, I just think we really need to kind of, we do just need to make sure that we stick together as much as we can through a journey which is really tough. We haven't been through this kind of journey before as a country for a very, very long period of time. And I don't, I don't want to be so silly about this. Of course, politicians are flawed like any other human beings. Of course, some of the decisions we make are not right or need to be improved or changed. But do I think, broadly speaking, we're taking the right steps in the difficult circumstances? We are, and I just really hope we'll see it through. Because the worst thing to do would be to duck it all, to bail out, just at the time we're actually starting to, maybe to make things better.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Would you join me in thanking the Deputy Prime Minister for his time here today?